So, guys, you're both out in the Club World Cup right now. I think, Rob, you're in Orlando. James, are you still in Philly right now where it's a little bit hot?
Yes, I am. There is a extreme heat warning here because it's pushing 100 degrees for the first time in 13 years. So I'm safely inside talking to you guys.
Do you do well in the heat, James? Are you a fan of the heat?
I'm all right, actually. Yeah, because I'm cold all the time in England normally. So when it's about 40 degrees here, I'm all right. I'm actually warm. So yeah, it's quite a rare feeling for me. What about you?
I think you both remember going to the World Cup in Qatar. Everyone was complaining about it's going to be really hot, it's going to be really bad, and air conditioning stadiums. And nobody actually realised that the USA in the summer is pretty hot. So I admire your guys' certainly resilience and resolve for putting up with that. I'm going to fly up next week, so I've got my shorts, my flip flops ready. But anyway, in the meantime, from the football perspective, has it been a success, James? Have you found it so far?
I would say that a lot of my pre-tournament concerns have been realised at this point, and I think what I didn't anticipate really was just the kind of lack of pickup domestically, and just how in day-to-day life in America, how hard it is to find the tournament. It's not easy to find on the TV channels. You go to the sports bars and they've got ESPN on pretty much every channel as normal on every screen, and they're not showing, they don't split it up. It's just their domestic sports here that are on pretty much all the time. I mean, you can find it, but it's in sort of, one bar in five rather than every sports bar having the game on. And I mean, there was one place in Atlanta, I don't know, Rob, if you've seen it when you were there, but there was a place that self-styled itself as the headquarters of the Club World Cup. They had a banner at the top of this bar, and you go in and they didn't show the Bayern Munich game at all that day. That was when they beat Ogden City 10-0. And then there was a game on late that night that Seattle Sounders were playing in, so a domestic team, and they didn't even show it, and they closed the bar 20 minutes into the game. So the sort of the local pickup has just it's been really hard to find it in amongst Game 7 of the NBA for the first time in, I think it's eight or 9 years. The Stanley Cup, the US Open Golf was on the first weekend that I came out here. So it's a very saturated market. And I think because this Club World Cup has been quite diluted in the group stage, you've had some good games, some pretty average games. I think it's struggled to capture the imagination in a way that hopefully it will do when the knockout matches start. The bigger teams play each other kind of every time, and we all know what they're playing for.
No, to be honest, I mean, I take all that, and all that is true. And my general feeling is that this has been better than I thought it would be. I think it's been helped because the South American teams have done well. One of my fears was that the European teams would just blitz everyone, and it would turn, the knockout rounds would just be an extended version of the Champions League, and everyone would kind of switch off. But the South American teams have done well. Their fans have been fantastic. They've given kind of these games a bit of colour and atmosphere, which has been fantastic. I think the players, I mean, obviously I've been based with City, usually, and I think the buy-in from players has been better than I thought it would be. I mean, again, the kind of noises coming out of City initially were that this was a bit of an annoyance. They've had a long, hard season where they hadn't done particularly well and they weren't getting any holidays, and then they were straight back out. I think the more the tournament's gone on for them, City have tried to make it feel like an international World Cup as best they can. And I think that's kind of helped. Obviously, you don't have that problem with Pep because he's such a fan of world football. This is his bag, basically. This is what he lives for, all these kind of different teams from all around the world competing against each other. I think the attendances have generally been better than I thought they were going to be. I mean, there was, again, worries that you could be playing in front of crowds of a couple of thousand. I mean, I don't think that's bar one or two. I don't think that's really happened. I would agree with James. I mean, the one thing that I find strange is the lack of kind of advertising around these cities. You drive in Ubers on stuff to stadiums and training grounds. You walk around these cities. There isn't a massive amount of advertising that these games are even going on. And I find that strange because, FIFA clearly want buy-in. So you would think that they would be trying to get the message out as best they can. I mean, the one thing that FIFA have said, and again, City have said as well, is that you have to remember that this is the first try at this. This extended tournament has never been done before. And when you talk about, an international World Cup, that's been established for decades. This is the first go. And I genuinely think that FIFA clubs, players think that maybe in 2 or 3, however many years, 2 or 3 tournaments, that they will get a proper buy-in of this. And maybe we're talking about this tournament, in 10 years, 15 years time as the tournament. I think we have to remember that this is the first try at this.
It's a bit strange over here because obviously right now in the UK summer, you've got, cricket is on right now. You've got tennis tournaments on right now. So it's definitely not been dominating the headlines. And I think, with due respect to Man City and Chelsea, they're not the biggest clubs in the Premier League. If Man United or Liverpool were here, even Arsenal, it would be different because I think with City and Chelsea, beyond their fan base, nobody really cares how they get on. And even beyond that, my next door neighbour is a Man City season ticket holder. And I spoke to him the day after the first game, the Casablanca game, and I said, did you watch the game? And he shrugged his shoulders and said, no, I play golf. So this is like a die-hard Man City fan who's been watching the club for 30 years, probably more than that. And he wasn't interested in the club's first ever game in the Club World Cup. So, it's not really caught fire in that aspect. And also a lot of the games UK-wise are, at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's been hard to get any momentum. But I think certainly you do know that there are games going on. And I think the interesting element has been the Flamengos and the River Plates and the Bocas that have, Botafogo that have got through. But I'd be lying to say if it was catching people's attention. It isn't right now. And I think I don't quite know how you change that unless you play in an area where the time zone works better. I don't know, but it doesn't feel like it's caught fire right now, I've got to say.
The way you change it is to go to 16 teams, but they've skipped that level out altogether. And there was no evidence that there was an appetite for a 32-team competition club summer tournament like this. There just wasn't any. The previous incarnations of this took place over a week. They had, I think, 6. I think the last one that City won had 6 matches in total, because they sort of created a kind of a first round and then the semi-final and the finals. So, they're talking about going to 48 teams. Like the International World Cup. That will be a joke if they do that. They need to make this 32-team format work. Had it been 16. And the games all mattered, a bit like the sort of old school European Championships, where you had sort of Spain playing Germany in the first game, and they knew if they lost it because it's top 2 go through and you're straight into the quarterfinals. You kind of knew, bang, straight away where you were. It was an easy sell to a casual audience. This game matters for both teams. If they lose it, they're really on the back foot from day one in the group. Whereas here it's kind of like we've not even really heard of some of the teams. The champions are here, but some of the champions are not here. It's one world champion, but how can you be world champion if you've not won your league or you've not won your continental competition? It's such a confusing kind of message to send to what, as I said, was a really sort of saturated sports market. I mean, just picking up on the Brazilian teams as well, that the only time I've really felt like I've been at a tournament was when Flamengo played Chelsea, and the night before Botafogo beat PSG, and we were out having dinner, and it's the first time where I've really felt a strong sort of fan presence in the city, and that's what a lot of these tournaments are about. Some of my best experiences of doing sort of World Cups and European Championships is where you go to a city and it's a class of cultures where fans from 2 different countries and the third host country all mingle together and they all sing their songs and the atmosphere is incredible and you sort of feel like you're really part of a kind of carnival of football. And here it's just not felt like that at all, apart from when Flamengo were in Philadelphia and they sort of booed Botafogo all the way through the game when they were playing PSG. And then at full time, the fans in the bar that we were in all started chanting. And I actually went over and said to them, like, well, I thought you weren't happy that they were won. And he said, well, no, we weren't. But what they've done gives us hope as another Brazilian team that we can beat the Europeans. And it feels as though if this tournament does have any kind of attraction. It is that tension between the South American sides wanting to prove themselves against the Europeans. I'm not sure there's the appetite on the European side quite so much to sort of stick it to the South Americans in the same way, but maybe that will come in time. And as Rob says, maybe with another kind of 2-3 goes at this, and it creates its own sort of legacy and its own history and its own sort of internal rivalries, that we will see that, and that the European teams will attack it with more intent and purpose than maybe they have done at the moment. But you sort of feel as though to do that, there has to be some give in the calendar, which obviously we all know isn't going to happen, because a lot of these players, I mean, Maresca, I've been with Chelsea, Maresca's not even hiding it. They're not training. They're barely training at the moment because of the heat. He's already said the players are tired from the first 2 games. He's going to have to rotate. He was talking yesterday about how this will be the 60th game of their season. It's difficult when the season comes in the middle for the South American clubs to compete with the intensity that they have at the end of a 60-game, 55-game season for the European sides.
The 2 issues that have come up over here, away from the football, have been the crowds, and we know that a lot of the crowds have been really poor. The first Chelsea game was terrible. I think 20,000 Atlanta. A couple of the City games have been poor. The Botafogo Atletico Madrid game in Pasadena was really bad on Monday night. I think for the proper World Cup, shall I say, or the World Cup next year, I think it'll be different because you've got a bigger fan base from all the different countries. I think that's an issue that won't be such a problem. But the weather's caught a lot of people by surprise. Not just the heat, but so many games have been delayed by thunderstorms. Or there was one game, I think it was a 2-hour delay at one game, and the game in New York was held up for 40 minutes. I mean, Rob, how can they address that next year? We know that America's got a wild climate at times, but what can they do? I mean, do they have to schedule games at different times to make it more appealing to the fans and players? Or how can they get around the situation where the weather is so unpredictable?
Well, I genuinely don't think that they can. I mean, I don't know. Once you've decided to hold a World Cup in America in the summer, you kind of live and die by the weather, and it'll be up to different associations to pick training bases that they decide is the best way to prepare. I mean, City have been based in Boca Raton in Florida, and we went down there a couple of days before they started their first game, and it was absolutely sweltering. I mean, Pep had them out there for 2 hours one day, and the players were walking off, and they looked half dead. They'd been sweating that much. I mean, City have been quite lucky in a sense that they played in Philadelphia first before this heat wave hit, so it was hot, but it wasn't too hot. And then they played their second game in Atlanta at 9:00 in an air-conditioned stadium. So there'll be stuff like that going on. I mean, I imagine associations will be looking at the schedule and thinking and praying that they get the benefit of the conditions, because playing at 12:00 in Miami, say, is completely different playing in Atlanta under a roof at 9:00. And you're talking about, and I imagine lots of people will be listening to this thinking, well, it's just a game of football. What does it matter? Well, it does matter. I mean, that ultimately could be the difference between winning or losing a group game and going home early. And I don't know how FIFA even sort that out, because the conditions are going to be so different. I mean, if you're playing in Seattle, for example, or if you've got 3 group games in Seattle, is that fair when you've got another team that are playing 3 group games in the Hard Rock in Miami? I mean, I don't know. There's going to be a lot of Football Association bosses, I imagine, petitioning FIFA, or FIFA having to answer questions about how they're deciding where they're going to place these games, because the weather here has been so wild and so different in these different cities that it is causing a competitive advantage for some of these teams.
I was surprised that they didn't use the stadium in Dallas for this tournament, the AT&T. That's an unbelievable stadium, by the way, but also it's covered. And Rob's right. The World Cup next summer, they'll England's chances, just to sort of turn it to England's chances will be considerably improved if they can play in air-conditioned stadiums. It reminds me a bit of Wimbledon, actually, when they shut the roof. For years and years and years, we petitioned for the centre courts at Wimbledon to have a roof. They put the roof on, and then the players talked about how it was almost a different tournament because the ball moved differently. The air-conditioned arena versus an open air grass court. It's quicker off the surface. The ball moves slightly differently. The moisture in the air is different. It's, obviously with football, it's not an exact comparison, but the physical ask of, asking players to play in 40-degree heat, pitch side, it could be that in the daytime during the heat wave versus an air-conditioned arena where it's probably half the temperature. I mean, it's a massive. You talk to anyone in sports science or any of the coaching staff. The Chelsea players yesterday, they were training at Philadelphia Union Subaru Park, which is a sort of small football stadium on the edge of the city, and about I'd say less than a quarter of strip of the stadium was covered in shade by just where the sun was. The sun was in the angle of the stand, and they had a kind of small strip where they were doing all of their training. Basically, they were doing all of their warm-ups, all of their drills in the shade, and by the side of the pit, they had fans with the water being pumped in, so it was pumping out water across the air to them. And they can't do sessions, so the games are going to be affected by this. I mean, obviously, Rob, you've been with City. Did he make 11 changes between the first and the second game? Like that many. I think he's made 4 or 5, and he'll probably do the same in their final game. They're going to have to do that. Now, that is going to benefit the bigger teams in the tournament next summer. And also, those sides who get a break, shall we say, for a respite from the heat in the group stage, it will be like a rotation, won't it? If they can play one game in sort of 20 degrees rather than 40 degrees, it gives them a huge advantage in the knockout rounds.
I'll give you an example of how tricky it is. After the City's first game was against Wydad in Philadelphia, and it was at 12 o'clock. And unfortunately for City, the game started under cloud cover and it was manageable. We spoke to Nathan Aki after the game. He said that at the start of the second half, the clouds open, the sun comes out, it starts to be absolutely roasting hot. And he said that he was looking around and the City players were struggling. The game slows and Wydad suddenly become, more into it because they're used to those conditions. And that was sort of a microclimate in the middle of a game. And Nathan Aki, he was talking about the performance and why City had started so well and kind of finished so well, and genuinely thought that because the clouds had opened and the sun started beaming down halfway through the game, that City had really started to struggle in that middle period of the game. And that just tells you how tricky it is that, some of these European teams who aren't used to these kind of conditions are really going to struggle. And that, City have got their knockout games are either going to be in Orlando, Miami. And that is a massive difference to playing somewhere further north, or we mentioned before in Atlanta under a roof. And it could be the difference between going home early and winning it.
Just that point. So next year, there's 16 venues at the Men's World Cup. Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, and Vancouver are all under roofs with climate control. So that's just 4 out of the 16 stadiums, and they're not all on the same blocks. Obviously, Vancouver will be on the western block, and I think Dallas, Houston, and Atlanta may be the central block. So you've got that to deal with. You've got potentially altitude issues in Mexico. It's probably going to be the most challenging World Cup ever in terms of logistics, because I know that a lot of countries will be based in certain parts of the country. But once the knockout stage kicks in, you kind of could be anywhere. So it's definitely one to watch. So we've kind of gone over quite a lot of negatives so far: the Global Cup, the weather, the football, the crowds. You two have been out there for a couple of weeks now. Both give us a positive each as to what's really cheered you up and made you really kind of think this is good. I know it's going to struggle for you, James, but Rob might have a better opportunity.
The South American teams doing well, I think, is great for the tournament. And genuinely, if on the ground, it feels like the tournament is building to something that's significant. I genuinely think and hope that when you get to the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, and the final with huge teams, hopefully from South America playing the big European teams, I think that there'll be a far greater interest. We'll have some great games of football and people will buy into it, because it does feel like it's heading somewhere. It doesn't feel like it's kind of just plodding along to a kind of end that people are ambivalent to. It does feel like it's building towards something. Hopefully we get that.
Yeah, to be fair, I agree with that. I do think there is a sense of we're sort of waiting for the proper stuff to start. Really, we kind of just got to wade through a bloated group stage. I mean, just to pick something slightly different, I'll just pick Lionel Messi having his moment. You know, I mean, we know that Inter Miami were kind of shoehorned into this competition on the basis of just trying to get Messi to be part of it. And, you know, and they got their social media viral clip, didn't they? They got that free kick against Porto that, you know, I've seen about 30,000 times on social media. Just every time I log on, it seems to just be there. And that's what they wanted, you know. And it's nice, you know, for everything that he's done for the game that he can still produce those kind of moments in a competition like this. And we're going to see him one more time in what is a narrative laden round of 16 game against Paris Saint-Germain in Atlanta. So, yeah, I'll go for that.
Just on that point, for those of us that aren't in the US that were, you know, looking from the outside, if you take Messi out of it, are there any players who are actually capturing the attention? Is it all about Messi, even though he's, you know, 47 years old or whatever?
Well, I mean,
still silly state.
I know.
Haaland is a big star. You can tell by the way that the reaction when he walks into stadiums, when he comes on as substitute or when his name's on the big screen in stadiums. He is obviously City star, but he's also a big star over here. He's, you know, the advertising I have seen, which isn't a lot, but in Philadelphia, the sort of banners over one of the City Hall buildings, and he's front and center. Very much look like he's meant to be kind of the next one to take over from the Messis and Ronaldos in terms of US audience.
Yeah, and another one on that banner actually is Cole Palmer. I have written a piece about him on the site that, you know, he's obviously somebody who's struggling a little bit to live up to that reputation. And we talk about the heat, and he seems to have been somebody who's been affected by that. Perhaps more than some of the others. I mean, they deleted the post afterwards, but when Flamenco beat Chelsea, there were a couple of social media digs at him, including one with the temperature, saying, you know, too hot for cold Palmer. And I think, you know, big things are expected of him. He's a very popular lad. You know, we all know that he's a man of few words, but he speaks. Whatever it says tends to go viral because he's just so sort of unfiltered and so relatable. But we've not really seen him get going yet in this tournament. A couple of flashes of link-up play with Liam Delap, and obviously it's a big game for Delap against Flamenco that, you know, we're going to see where can he fill the boots of Nicholas Jackson, and can he create that link-up with Palmer, because the sort of thing to recommend Jackson the most is the link up and the understanding that he's got with Palmer and Noni Madueke, and if Delap can replicate or improve on that, then you know, he's probably going to be their starting 9 for next season. But yeah, so Palmer's one who's really waiting to ignite. I think if he comes alive, then that's what you want, doesn't it? You know, you want these big players, Haalands and the Messis, and you need these players to turn up and really set the imagination alight. And probably not enough of them have done it yet. But there's still plenty of time. To some of them, anyway.
Okay, we're going to take a break right now, and we're going to come back with Lizzy Becherano, who's been covering Inter Miami during the tournament. Okay, so joining us now is Lizzy Becherano, who's been covering Inter Miami during the tournament so far. And Lizzy, I think we spoke about a month ago, and I was quite dismissive about Inter Miami's chances, thinking that we're a team of veterans that were going to get embarrassed. So I've been pretty much wrong on that one, haven't I?
Yeah, you have. I mean, I will say you're not the only one who thought so. There were a lot of doubts coming into this tournament. I think even internal, Sergio Busquets saying they were not at the level to compete. Messi saying that he had different expectations than when he was at Barcelona and competing in earlier editions. You're not the only one, but they made history and now have qualified to the round of 16.
So what does this mean for MLS? I mean, because it must be a great boost for MLS to have all their teams into the knockout stages, because, again, people would think that MLS is quite a weak league. It's where European players go to retire. So this must be a real boost for MLS, and it's standing in the world.
Yes and no. I think the perception of Major League Soccer, given the participation of the Sounders and LAFC, hasn't necessarily changed. I think the case of Inter Miami is interesting because there's still a team with Lionel Messi on it. So the expectations were obviously different than considering them a regular Major League Soccer side. So from what I've seen and heard, I think the idea is, well, Messi is still Messi, and MLS has one of the greatest players in their team, but the rest are still at the same level that many thought would be in Major League Soccer.
Lizzy, do you think, I'm curious to know, in Miami, does it feel different? Does the city feel like there's a tournament on? Because in Philadelphia, it's not always felt like that. When the Brazilian teams have been here, but there's been a big influx of a fan base, and you felt the kind of city's sort of shift, the dynamic shift a bit. What's it been like in Miami? Has there been does it feel like there's a tournament on?
Yes, very much so. I think the teams that got to play in Miami made it very interesting. Obviously, we've seen the commotion of the Boca Juniors fans. That was particularly interesting because Miami has such a condensed Argentinian community. So not only did thousands and thousands of Boca Juniors fans actually travel and make their way about the city and do like the flag demonstration on the beach, but they're playing here awoken like all the Argentinian support living in Miami. So I have never seen so many Boca Juniors jerseys being worn around, and not just for the games, but more so just like in regular pre-match days, pre-match activities, just around the city. And the same thing kind of happened with Palmeiras yesterday, where the days leading up to the game, there was green jerseys everywhere, fans kind of flocking to different aspects of Miami. So it does have that international feel that you would feel with a World Cup, where you see so many fan bases kind of coming in, getting to know the city, playing tourist, and then having their own fan rituals and demonstrations and traditions around the city. So I think that has been particularly cool. But I do think it made it so because of the communities that were already here. So there was like this connection between incoming fans and then like Miami residents.
Lizzy, obviously this has been, you mentioned the World Cup then, and I guess this has been a little bit of a dry run for the World Cup in a year's time. Have you had enough time to sort of have any views about how ready the US is to host a World Cup? Have you got any worries? Anything that's gone better than you perhaps thought?
A lot of concerns, yes. I think a lot of people have asked me whether the 2026 World Cup is going to be a success. And that word, I think, is really relative because it's a success to who? Fans will come, international fans will travel, stadiums will be full. We've seen it at Hard Rock. I mean, there's been 3 or more games that have seen 60,000 fans plus in attendance. So in that sense, yes, it's a World Cup, and a World Cup will always draw audiences, especially now with the larger format. But there are obviously concerns. I mean, the weather has been one of them. A lot of international figures have spoken about the weather and this heat and whether or not they'll be able to play in it. And obviously the infrastructure of certain cities. I mean, I went to Atlanta. That stadium seems to be great, but Hard Rock still struggles with public transportation, security aspects, and not even considering the whole pitch conversation that I know Jude Bellingham came out to say that it's been quite difficult. And I believe it was Lautaro Martinez also that mentioned the pitches being an issue. So there are definitely like various concerns, some that FIFA do have control over, like the pitches and to a certain extent the transportation, but others like weather that is going to be difficult, whether that is simply the heat or the storms and the summer hurricanes that come through. Now, we can get into why FIFA decided on 12 p.m. or 3 p.m. kickoff times and how that is tailored more towards TV audiences than actual attending fans. And maybe they'll change that for the World Cup, maybe not. But there are definitely concerns. But that's not to say that people won't travel. It's a World Cup. We saw it in Qatar.
Lizzy, just on the travelling, and obviously you mentioned the Boca fans in Miami and the big Argentinian community. We saw last year from afar how kind of chaotic the Copa America was, certainly with a lot of the Colombia fans as well. Do you think that lessons have been learned from that? Is it too difficult to tell? Because it's a much smaller sample size, isn't it, for a club World Cup, because you're not getting the whole movement of a nation. But I guess we saw last year what will probably happen next year, and it could even be bigger because it's a World Cup. So I guess we're looking at Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, all these huge nations in South and Central America are going to be the top of the tournament because of what happened last year and because of their huge fan bases.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes that have been made, and I will say props to FIFA and props to particularly Hard Rock, which was obviously the scene of the very chaotic final between Colombia and Argentina. This time around, there's a lot of security points that limit which fans and how fans enter the stadium. So during Copa America, literally anybody could have made their way to the stadium doors and found a way to get in. Now, this time around, in order to enter the perimeter of the parking lot, which is around 1 mile before even getting to the stadium doors, you need to show ID, you need to show your ticket, you need to be able to show that you have purchased access to this game. And then after that, there's another security point or even getting to your seat. So I think that coupled with a lot of security presence, I mean, FIFA kind of made a partnership with Miami-Dade Police and Hard Rock Security. So there's been a lot of security aspects and a lot of security present in every game. I haven't seen chaos at all. That's not to say there hasn't been, but I think it's been managed well. There's definitely a sense of order when it comes to these games rather than what we saw at Copa, which was more so kind of just chaos. Like, really, anybody could have showed up. Anybody could have tailgated. These fans tend to drink a lot before heading into the match. So I think that, coupled with a lack of security presence, didn't really help. And so FIFA has done a decent job at managing that.
I think one of the issues that I've noticed, and I was at the opening game with Lizzy in Miami, is the lack of public transport is an issue. I know Mark and James, we were both in Qatar, and that was one element of that tournament that worked quite well, that underground system that just took you to the majority of the stadiums when fans were kind of piling out. The queues seemed quite orderly. The trains kept coming every couple of minutes, and it got people out off the site pretty quickly. And I know that American culture is to drive to these big events, park and tailgate and stuff. It's just not what European and South American fans are used to. I think it's a little bit different getting to a game because it obviously depends on what time you get your Uber and your taxi and you get dropped off and you can sort of walk towards the stadium. It's getting out has been an issue. And obviously as journalists, we're all kind of hanging around a little bit after the game anyway for mixed zones and press conferences, but we've been coming out sort of an hour and a half, 2 hours after the full-time whistle. And there has been a little bit of chaos, with fans trying to get away from these stadiums, walking miles to find Ubers not being allowed into the sort of perimeter of the stadium and people sort of walking, miles down these quite busy roads really to find somewhere where an Uber can pick them up. Now, I know obviously it's something that local organising committees and FIFA will look at ahead of the World Cup. I'm just not sure how much change there can be, in terms of those issues. I mean, it's different in some places. For the game in Philadelphia City's game, match day -1 and match day, we were able to get the metro from the city centre out to the stadium. That seemed to work quite well, but those facilities just don't exist in a lot of these American cities. And if you get a load of European fans and South American fans piling into these cities for World Cup games, that could be chaos, particularly after games.
Yeah, and just a little bit to point out on that, I think we saw during Copa games at MetLife in particular, that does have an access point with a train. However, for us journalists, that train stops running at a certain point, and more times than not, we were finished once that service ended. So it was up to you to find transportation, whether that be Uber at 2, sometimes even 2:30 in the morning. And most of these stadiums tend to be further away from the city in not so great areas. And I do want to point out Hard Rock because, again, a lot of people think it's in Miami, and it's not. It's Miami Gardens, which, if you're local, is a huge distinction. And you absolutely don't want to be there by yourself at 2:30 in the morning. And so there's been cases of media shuttles. They don't accommodate the influx of journalists. So I cannot imagine for fans where in Miami there is no public transportation like there is in Philadelphia, and it is absolutely not walkable.
I would just say on that, we should just flag that is a problem in Europe as well. San Siro is one of the most iconic stadiums in Europe, and it is a pain to get away from that stadium. They tend to shut the Becherano about midnight, and there have been times where you cannot get a cab for love nor money, and you are walking a long way. And I've done that with a lot of fans, hundreds of fans who are still trying to get away. The Allianz Arena at Munich is another one where it's a long, long walk to the rail link there, and that shuts. And then you can be waiting a long time to try and get an Uber to come and pick you up to take you back into the city. So I think we should just, for balance, we should at least just say that this is a problem that affects established sort of European powerhouse cities and clubs. This is not just a case of us going and looking at America and saying, oh, your public transport doesn't suit this tournament.
Yeah, that gives me the excuse to talk about getting back from Juventus Stadium this season when it involved a Juventus Ultra, a unlicensed taxi in a spade, or a short in the back of his car being stopped by police at 2:00 in the morning. So, yeah, these things tend to be kind of global and dramatic wherever you go. I'm sure we've all got those stories as well, but I'm really looking forward to my trip to Miami Gardens next week now, Lizzy. Thanks for that. It's all that I need some security of the shares. Yeah.
You're the first person who's ever said that in their entire.
Yeah, I think there's probably an element of sarcasm there, but yeah, at 2:00 in the morning, I was thinking, yeah, this is the place to be. But I mean, overall, Lizzy, I mean, Miami has been a success in terms of, they brought colour to it, they brought Messi's goal, like James was referencing earlier on about the free kick he scored in the game against Porto. They have been a positive story from this tournament. A lot of people are thinking it's going to be a negative tournament, but they have been a positive. Even though they shouldn't be there, they've been a positive story.
Oh, I think you just hit on one of the biggest Major League Soccer's controversies in recent history. They think they deserve a place, and you know what? I think they made it work to a certain extent. No, they've definitely been a success. Internal markers. We heard Jorge Mas, co-owner of the team, we heard Javier Mascherano, head coach, mention that their target for success was always qualifying to the round of 16. I mean, they wanted to make it out of the group and then go game by game. Many outbalanced that and said they got one of the easiest groups and they should 100% go through. I don't believe that to be true to a certain extent. But they've definitely succeeded in what they wanted to do. And I think that's been great, especially the game against Porto. I think had they beaten Al-Ahly, drawn against Palmeiras, and then drawn against Porto, it would be a different story. But beating Porto the way that they did, I think, allows for this team to still be considered relevant and for Messi to still be considered relevant, no matter his age, which 38 today.
So the big question is, will Inter Miami still be in the tournament when I get there next week? That's debatable, I guess.
See, that's a hard one. I mean, they got PSG.
No.
I don't double doors now, just keep it going.
I mean, listen, Jordi Alba said yesterday, why can't they dream? And yeah, why can't they? So no, but also why can't they dream?
That's a good enough way to end this section. We're now going to throw to Alex Kirkland, who's been with Real Madrid, who definitely expect to be there when I get out there next week. So we'll speak to Alex next, but cheers, Lizzy. So we're now welcoming Alex Kirkland, who's our Madrid correspondent, who's had a fairly busy tournament, jet setting across America, LA to Miami, watching Real, Atletico. Atletico are out, Real are still in. So from a Madrid perspective, Alex, how's it been?
Yeah, I think it's been mixed. As you say, Atletico are going home and they're not happy about that. They've had a very peculiar tournament. I was with them for their opening game in LA against PSG when they got thumped 4-0. But after that, I mean, to be going home having got 6 points and won 2 games is very, very unusual. I mean, how many teams go home from the group stage of a tournament with 6 points? I don't know. So they go home with their prize money, which they'll be pleased about, but the feeling that they could easily have gone further in this tournament. And who knows, maybe doubled that prize money if they'd got to the latter stages. As for Real Madrid, It's interesting, listening to Xabi Alonso, because I think he's very aware of the limitations of, how little time he's had with the team. He was asked about this, how much of you is there in this Real Madrid team already? And he said very little. He just hasn't had time. It's just a handful of training sessions here, a handful of training sessions back in Madrid before they flew over. And even the way the games have gone have sort of really limited what they can do. Just look at their second game against Pachuca. You had a defender, Asensio, sent off after 7 minutes, and whatever kind of the pre-game plan was went out the window. I think there's little signs, there's evidence of kind of some progress, especially the way they sort of responded to that early sending off and 1-3-1 against Pachuca in the end. But like I say, not much, because they just haven't had the time, and it's going to take a while. And I think we all know that, and Xabi Alonso has sort of admitted this, these are difficult circumstances to take over a team, let alone kind of making your impression on it. But unlike Atletico, who are going home, Madrid are at least, heading for the knockout stages, and they'll be pretty confident, I think, about being here for a while.
Just on that, on the Real situation, from a news perspective, Alex, are we going to see Mbappe this week? Is he going to play? Is he obviously he's had gastroenteritis? He's not been fit to play, and it would seem a bit of a rush to get him back for the final group game. So, do you think he's going to be fit to appear?
Yeah, they've been very careful with him. They sort of eased him back in. He was, at the time of recording, he was back in the gym yesterday, but not out training fully with his teammates. Looking at the pictures we've seen of him, he looks like he's lost some weight with that bug over the last few days. He was pretty much, he was hospitalized briefly, and after that he was sort of confined to his hotel room as well. So like I say, they're being very, very cautious with him. The last time Xabi Alonso spoke, he said he wasn't ruled out for the last game against Salzburg. They were going to see how it goes, but there's no rush, given that they've got 4 points now from their opening 2 games. They don't have to rush him back. They could easily wait for the knockout stage. And given the conditions here in terms of the heat, the humidity, very real risk of things like dehydration when you're suffering from something like gastroenteritis. So I think they've got every reason to be careful with him and take it step by step.
Can we just talk about Trent? Obviously, Trent is a subtopic of the subject of topic, or the subject of conversation, I should say, every time that Real Madrid play at the moment. But he's had a bit of a mixed start. I saw the game against Al Hilal in his first game. He was great going forward and not so great defensively, which I'm sure you'll kind of get used to in the years ahead. Is that the way it's been perceived so far, that he's been good going forward and not so good defensively?
Yeah, in that first game in particular, we saw literally the best and worst of Trent, didn't we? Because he was involved in the Real Madrid goal, sort of playing one of the early passes in that move. But equally, he was badly caught out at one point and was saved by the offside flag with a disallowed goal when he was caught upfield. Again, I think it's just much too early to make any judgments. Real Madrid's defence as a whole hasn't looked great. You've got 2 new players, of course, there in Trent and Howson. It's been Howson who's been getting all the praise, I have to say, from the Madrid's kind of journalists. They've been loving the way that Howson, especially the way he's on the ball, bringing the ball out from the back. And because Madrid lack that kind of player in central midfield, it's been Howson who's been doing a lot of that with the ball at his feet. Trent, not so much. Trent, it's been quiet, and it's been a relatively slow start. But like I say, I think everyone accepts that it's just far too early to make any kind of judgment, especially given how those 2 games have gone. Can I ask Alex about Rodrigo? Obviously, there's been a lot of talk, Premier League talk about him possibly making the switch to England. Maybe he's the odd one out with Mbappe kind of coming in a year ago. I mean, where does he stand under the new manager? Are you expecting him to move? Are there noises in Madrid about possibly him leaving? Yeah, it's finishing his 2 games so far. Started the first game, didn't play in the second game at all. Didn't even get off the bench against Pachuca. Now, of course, like I say, in that game, it's a pretty specific situation, down to 10 men. Maybe that's why he didn't get on, but it was definitely noted here that he didn't get on at all. Xabi Alonso's been kind of making all the right noises, and so is Rodrigo. And the little we've seen from him, stuff like, social media posts saying that he's happy and stuff like that. But let's see, because in that opening game, he played on the right, and that's where he doesn't want to play. He doesn't want to play on the right wing anymore. We've been told that. He's not happy with that. He wants to play on the left. I think it's one that's going to go potentially all summer. He was waiting to sort of hear from Xabi Alonso in terms of the role that Alonso had in mind for him. They've had a bit of time together now, but like I say, let's see what happens in game 3 in the group, because the fact they didn't play at all in game 2, I think is notable. We all know that there's a lot of interest there. There's interest from the Premier League. We also know that ideally he wants to stay at Real Madrid. He wants to be a Real Madrid player, but he wants to be a Real Madrid player who is important, who's playing, who feels comfortable. What happened in the last season, basically disappearing from the scene completely for the last few weeks of the season was very strange. He wasn't right mentally, as well as whatever physical problems he may or may not have had. But like I say, I think it's one to watch because even though Xabi Alonso's been saying, he's important, we want him here, he can be a big player for us. Let's see if that is actually played out on the field.
Do you think though that because I know that from the Arsenal point of view, because obviously that's the club that's particularly been linked with him, and I think that interest is genuine. I think part of the problem from Arsenal side is that I think Nico Williams was kind of their preferred choice for quite a long time for that position, and it looks as though he wants to go to Barcelona. So they're sort of looking at other, not that Rodrigo would be a backup at 85, 90 million euros, whatever it would be, but I think that was the kind of balance in their thinking. It's obviously that's shifted because the player wants to go to Barcelona. Do you get a sense from Rodrigo that he's just sort of flirting a little bit to just get what he wants at Madrid, or do you think there really is a genuine sort of desire of his to actually want to leave?
Well, like I say, I think his priority would be to stay around Madrid, but with the caveat that it's staying around Madrid and being important. I'm not sure. I think given that he's been through this cycle around Madrid where he wasn't playing enough, or he felt like he wasn't playing enough, he was always sort of the third or fourth wheel, behind Vinicius and Bellingham and then Mbappe. Then last season where he played a lot, but didn't necessarily deliver, certainly not consistent. He didn't score enough goals, wasn't sort of decisive enough. He's at the point now, getting to the stage of his career where he needs to be playing. And there's still a feeling this is the guy who's, everyone agrees he's incredibly talented, but that talent hasn't been unlocked, certainly with any degree of consistency. So I think it's getting to the point where, like I say, if it's made clear to him that he's not going to be, a key player around Madrid, that he's not going to be starting every week, certainly not in his preferred position, that's the time when I think he'd be looking to move on. But also, like I say, Madrid, it's not that Madrid are desperate to let him go. Certainly what we've been told is that if he were to leave, it would be because he tells Madrid, I want to leave. And he has to basically force a move. Now, Madrid, they're busy already this summer, of course, with Trent and Howson, Mastantuono looking to bring Carreras as well, maybe a midfielder, depending on how things go. Madrid, I think, would welcome, in a lot of ways, a big sale to finance a lot of that. But it's not like they're desperate to offload Rodrigo. So that's the problem. I think Madrid ideally would like Rodrigo to stay. Rodrigo ideally would like to stay as well. But like I say, when it comes to it, if he feels like he's going to have another season where he's not really playing and he's not playing where he wants and he's not one of the main men, I think he would accept a departure, and then it comes down to whether the club would as well, and if they could make it work financially.
Can I just ask you about Jude Bellingham? Obviously, he's always a headline, isn't he? He's been a headline this time. He's scored a goal. He's had some outspoken comments. I think one of the interesting elements is that if Real win their group and Dortmund win their group, we could have Jude Bellingham versus Joe Bellingham in the quarterfinals, which, I'm not sure if we're at the stage where there's any chat about that yet, but both Joe and Jude are quite... They don't like to talk about each other in the sense that they don't want to be compared to each other. Certainly Joe doesn't want to be compared to Jude, but it's kind of inevitable, isn't it, that, Joe's midfielder who's scoring goals. Do you see the chat building up for that game next week if Real and Dortmund do actually meet in the quarterfinals?
Yeah, I've got to say, it hasn't been talked about here. I hadn't even really considered that possibility. The big thing from Jude Bellingham the other day was confirmation of what we'd reported, which was that shoulder surgery he's going to have after this competition. He said, look, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say, but I've got that shoulder surgery scheduled for, I think he said 2 days after the final, presuming Madrid go that far. And it was interesting hearing him talk about just what a big deal that's been for him. He said, basically, I've run out of patience with the shoulder. Remember, this shoulder injury stretches back to November 2023. We're talking about getting on for 2 years ago that he dislocated that shoulder. Since then, he's been wearing this strapping. He talked the other day, especially out here where it's so hot and so humid. He talked about in his post-match presser the other day how uncomfortable it is. He said he wears what he calls this brace, this kind of strapping on the shoulder. It gets out of place. Opposition players pull on it and he has to readjust it. And he just said, I've run out of patience with it. It's time that I get this surgery done. I mean, we've talked before, haven't we, about the timing of that and whether it was wise to do it after this tournament and why didn't they do it before this tournament, to get ready for the next season in La Liga. But it's happening. And like I said, I thought it was interesting to hear just from him how much of a discomfort it's been for him and how much it's affected his game. Because we've all seen, I think, that he hasn't pretty much, on and off, hasn't been the same player since that injury.
James, just on Chelsea, obviously, we're recording this on Tuesday, so by the time we come out, Chelsea could be on the way home, but, we'll see if that happens. But how's it been so far? Well, obviously, Nicholas Jackson's been sent off again, Leon Delap's had his debut. Chelsea, from what I've seen, have been a bit disappointing, but, we can't really judge them on the situation they're in with the heat and the strange scenario whereby they're playing at the end of a season before the start of a new season. It's all a bit weird with Chelsea right now.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit confused, I think, is the word I'd use, because that they sort of went into this tournament describing it as both an important competition that they wanted to win, but also important preparation for next season. And it does feel as though they've been caught between those two positions a little bit. In the second game against Flamenco that they lost, and they, sort of 6 minutes of madness where they conceded twice and Nicholas Jackson got himself sent off. They kind of fell apart a bit, really. But in that game, they were lucky to be ahead in the first half. They experimented. They put Reece James in midfield. Palmer kind of played more, particularly out of possession, played more out on the right rather than centrally. And Maresca afterwards was talking about how, we wanted to look at something that we think will stand us in good stead for next season, give us another sort of variation in the way we play that we feel will help us going forward. And you sort of think, well, okay, but you've just cost yourself a chance to win the group there by that, and made the potential route through to the final a lot harder. And, I know we've talked a lot in previous podcasts about the prize money on offer here, and it's £97 million to the winner. Chelsea have had to be quite creative with their accounts to satisfy PSR regulations. They're still being investigated by UEFA to see if the two sort of most controversial aspects, the selling of the two hotels on the Stamford Bridge site and also selling their women's team to themselves, basically to a parent company for a world record fee for a women's team of 200 million, whether they actually stand up in relation to the FFP, UEFA's FFP rules. There's only so many times you can do that. And really, they can't afford to look a gift horse in the mouth, really, and go out of this tournament early. So, given that, it's quite surprising that Maresca sort of tried to experiment and talked about next season and all these kind of things. But there have been other sort of more positive elements. I mean, the fact that they're in this competition means Liam Delap gets a chance to come away with the group. He obviously knows some of the players from his time at Manchester City. There's obviously Cole Palmer, but he also played under Maresca in the Manchester City academy side. But he's had a chance here to, on a day-to-day basis, to get to know the group and and immerse himself in everything they're trying to do. And he's got a real opportunity to lead the line perhaps earlier than people expected. And Jackson's given him that possibility. Obviously, at the time we're recording, we don't know if they're going to go through. We assume they will. But what we do know is that FIFA have extended that ban to Jackson from the mandatory 1 game to 2 games. So if they do get through, Delap will start that last 16 game in Charlotte at the weekend. And so he's get a clear run now at that. And if he has 2 good performances, then there's every chance that he could start as the number 9 for next season. And then you wonder when that leaves Nicholas Jackson. So yeah, it's been a bit of a confused picture. They've complained a lot about the heat. I know a lot of teams have done that, but I think they've been more pronounced than most. I mean, Maresca described it as almost impossible to put a session on. It's extreme conditions here in Philadelphia at the moment. I don't think anybody too critical of him for that. We're talking about it pushing 100 degrees here for the first time in I think it's 13 years. So, it is a pretty exceptional set of circumstances. But they've not looked settled. They've not played particularly well. It's almost as if the end to the season where they beat Forest on the final day to get Champions League football, and then the second half of the Conference League final against Betis, where they came back and ended up winning that quite comfortably. It is the anomaly, really. They've not really been playing very well for a while, so that is a concern for them, at the moment.
Rob, just on City, how can we judge them? They've beaten Wydad from Casablanca, and they've beaten Al Ain from Abu Dhabi, and they've got some new players coming in. And watching from afar, it seems that we're giving City a lot of praise when it's not really warranted because of the opposition they're facing. So, are they the real deal under Pep right now, or is the Juventus game later this week the one that we're going to really find out whether the new players are capable of replacing the great players that have gone before them?
Well, yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, we've got no idea of what City's level is at the moment. They won 2 games that they should have won. I must say that in both of those games, they had nervous moments, particularly with Dad, on the break a couple of times before the end of the first half. City looked vulnerable. But again, Pep Guardiola picked a really young back 4 with Vitor Rice and Rico Lewis and Nico O'Reilly. So, not a back 4 that he would ever pick in the Premier League. The Juventus game is the one where you're going to find out where they're at. The one thing that I would say is that, James is talking there about, Maresca talking about this is our 60th game of the season. Well, Pep has tried to make a really clear distinction that this isn't the end of last season. This is start of a new season. They've pushed through changes that perhaps they could have made later in the summer, like bringing in Ryan Shirky, Aït-Nouri, Reinders from Milan. Even the coaching staff has changed with Pep Lijnders here, Colo Torres here, who's moved up from the under-18s. Tiny little things that don't really matter, like swapping Scott Carson as your third choice goalkeeper for Marcus Bettinelli. City are saying that all of these little things, the idea is to make this feel like a fresh start. Again, the problem is, like you just said, mentioned in your question, we've got no idea where City are at. I mean, it's entirely possible that they go and beat Juventus really comfortably, top the group, and then have an easier route into the latter stages of this competition. You could also see them losing and drawing, finishing second, and then there's a possibility of playing Real Madrid in the second round, and they get knocked out straight away. They just haven't played the level of opposition that they need to show where they're at. And as daft as it sounds, because obviously all of us will have watched City, hundreds of times over the last few years. At the moment, they're a bit of an unknown quantity, and it will be really interesting on Thursday against Juventus to see what team Pep Guardiola picks, because so far he's picked two entirely different first 11s. Ruben Diaz hasn't started a game, Rodri hasn't started, Erling Haaland's only started one, Ederson's only started one. It'll be really interesting to see if he picks a team against Juventus that we would expect him to pick against a Liverpool or Arsenal in a Premier League, or whether it's going to be a kind of mismatch of his starters and squad players. Thursday is really important in terms of how we see Pep Guardiola viewing this entire tournament and what their level is at all. He'll tell you everything you need to know on Thursday when they play Juventus.
Can I just ask you guys individually? We'll start with Alex and James and Rob, just in terms of once these tournaments finished, whether Real gets the final, Chelsea gets the final, Chelsea knocked out overnight, who knows? What are these clubs planning to do in terms of are their players now going on a break? Because Rob, you just said that this is the start of City's season. Nobody's had a break apart from a brief, week, 10 days. So what are their plans? Is it time for a break? Because the reason I'm asking is because FC Salzburg are in this competition, Red Bull Salzburg, however you want to describe them. Their first Champions League game is the 23rd of July, but they could be in the knockout stages next week. So the European teams, they've come into this tournament without a break, and I don't know what Real, Chelsea and City are planning to do between now and the start of their seasons.
Real Madrid get a break. The big thing for them is, are they going to start the La Liga season late or not? Because obviously La Liga is due to start mid-August. Javier Tebas, La Liga president's already admitted that Madrid have put in the request to start the league late. We don't know if they'll be missing just the first round of games or even the second round of games. This is presuming, of course, they get to the latter stages. And Tebas said, we're going to see how far they go. If they get to the semis or the final, they'll be looking at starting La Liga a week late at least. And it's not ideal, but what alternative do you have given the time, given the fact that you've got the obligatory 3 weeks off for the players, and then after that you've got to somehow get ready for the league season. So yeah, let's see how far Real Madrid go. But like I say, if they get to I think it'll be the semis or the final, they'll be looking at starting La Liga at least a week late.
James?
Yeah, Chelsea's plan is to give them a break and then not go away. So they're talking about doing a sort of training block at Cobham. So they kind of feel like all the team bonding stuff, as we were sort of talking about earlier with Delap, kind of getting them in and having the sort of day-to-day interaction and being away, obviously, they kind of feel like that they don't need to go away again to do that. I mean, if they get knocked out really early and there's a chance to squeeze in something with a bit of cash, you can see the temptation. But sort of before they were coming out here, my understanding was the plan was that if they were getting to the sort of quarters, semis kind of level, they were here into sort of early July. They'd give the players 3 weeks off. They'd then have something like a 2-week training block at Cobham and try and go into the season as best they can.
Rob, we know that Man City tried to get the start of the season delayed, but the Premier League knocked it back. There's a World Cup at the end of the season. That's why you can't extend the season beyond what it is. So are City doing the same as Chelsea, just trying to squeeze a break in?
Well, I mean, the City players haven't been told what kind of break they're getting, and they've been quite open about that. And obviously, it'll depend on when they go home from this tournament. I mean, to put it into context, we spoke to Bernardo Silva before the first game in Philadelphia. He obviously won the Nations League with Portugal. He said he's had 5 days off between the end of last season, then starting with Portugal in the Nations League, and then coming straight here. And he's making no secret of the fact that that's not enough of a break. I mean, City's plan, again, like James has said, City won't go away somewhere else, but they'll play a couple of friendlies at the CFA. The one thing that City are saying is quite a big deal is the fact that there won't be a Community Shield for them. Obviously, they didn't want to lose the FA Cup final, obviously not. But one of the consequences of that is that they don't have to play in the Community Shield, which gives them a little bit of extra time to prepare for the Premier League. And also what Pep has done historically in different summers is been happy to start the season undercooked. He's happy to give his big players an extra week or two rest. He didn't call them all back for the Community Shield last summer when United did. So he'll be happy to go in, maybe a little bit underprepared for those first games in the Premier League. On the understanding is that they'll hit peak fitness around sort of January, and then you don't lose another game and possibly win the title. So, City will try to manage it as best they can. I'm assuming all the players are assuming that they will get some kind of break. They just don't know what it is yet because it'll depend on how far they get in this tournament.
Well, I'm hoping that you three will get a break. I'm not sure ESPN is going to allow that before the season starts because you've got pre-season tours to do. Let's be honest, with different clubs. But anyway, listen, thanks for your time, Alex. Enjoy remainder of your time in the US. And we're going to speak to Jeff Carlisle after the break about the Gold Cup and the US men's national team under Mauricio Pochettino this summer. So we've discussed the Club World Cup, but obviously there's another tournament going on in the US right now. It's the Gold Cup, and we've got Jeff Carlisle, who's been covering that for the US men's national team. It doesn't seem to have caught on a bit like the Club World Cup. So why is the Gold Cup not catching the attention of the US right now, Jeff?
Well, I think there are a few reasons for that. First of all, it's held every 2 years. So I think there's a little bit of, tournament fatigue, I think. And then for the US, there are a lot of players missing. You start with Christian Pulisic, who opted to rest, but then there were a lot of guys injured. Anthony Robinson had knee surgery. You had a situation with Folarin Balogun. He had an ankle ailment. Serginho Dest was coming off of a ACL reconstruction. He was back in the league in Holland for the last few months, but Mauricio Pochettino and his staff decided that he was not quite fit enough to really to play for the U.S. in this tournament. So you add that up, and it's very much in some places not even really a B team. It's more like a C+ team that's out there. So and then the ticket prices too. I think there's been a lot of complaints over the years about how expensive the tickets are. I mean, the game in Austin, right before kickoff, you had the second deck at Q2 Stadium. Those tickets were going for $114 a piece on SeatGeeks, which is one of the ticket selling sites. So fans look at that and they're just like, no, thank you. I'll try to either go watch Austin FC, which is the local club, or they'll go to an NWSL game. I mean, it's the United States, so there's a lot of different ways that soccer fans can get their fix for live soccer. So and then also the Club World Cup is going on as well. So I think there's definitely some market saturation going on, but then also, the U.S. team has not been doing that well. I mean, in the run-up to this tournament, they had lost 4 in a row at home, which was the first time since 1988 that had ever happened. So I think there's a lot of factors going on, but we'll see how, now that the knockout rounds are here, we'll see how things go. I mean, usually the attendance starts to increase, when the knockout rounds begin, and CONCACAF has said they've already distributed 50,000 tickets for the finals. So hopefully the quarterfinals and the semifinal will generate a little bit more momentum for that.
You mentioned Pulisic earlier on, Jeff, and obviously there's been quite a lot of noise about Pochettino's decision not to select him for the friendlies or the Gold Cup. He used that phrase, "I'm not a mannequin," which takes a bit of working out. How's that been perceived? Because obviously we talk about burnout quite a lot. Is he not just playing the long game with Pulisic and thinking, right, let's give him a rest now? He's one of our best players. He'll be fit and ready to go in the World Cup. Or is there more to it than that? Is it a deeper situation than just simply resting him for next year?
Well, I think Pochettino has made some thinly veiled criticisms of the culture around the U.S. men's national team. He's made comments before about how, listen, you're not here to play golf or go out to dinner with your family. You're here to take care of your work. You take care of your business. He walked those comments back a little bit later on, but I think he's been a little mystified at the fact that some of the players just don't seem to be putting in the same level of effort that they do with their clubs. I mean, even Tyler Adams said, that he saw guys not going in for challenges, not winning duels. I mean, this was back in March when they finished 4th in the CONCACAF Nations League. And so to me, that sounds like, there's a little bit of a wrestling match going on in terms of the culture. And so I think there's a little bit of that. I mean, Pulisic, one question that I don't think got asked was, why not let Pulisic skip the first 2 friendlies, take some time off, heal up a little bit, and then be eased back into the Gold Cup? But that doesn't sound like it was ever really on the table. And then I think Pulisic didn't really help himself with some of the messaging. He said, he went to Pochettino. He said he needed a rest. It's one thing if guys are injured, but that was not the reason given by Pulisic or his camp. So, I think Pulisic, I think you're right that Pochettino is playing the long game a little bit, but I think there's a little bit of, like I said, a wrestling match going on behind the scenes in terms of players' commitment and how much effort and energy they're devoting to the national team.
Jeff, without getting into the politics of it, because that's a different podcast entirely, just from an outsider seeing the Juventus team go to the White House and then Pochettino talking about that as if to sort of say, well, maybe we'll get an invite one day, kind of, I'd like to go type thing. Do you feel there is a bit of a competition going on between the Gold Cup and the Club World Cup for attention? It was part of that behind the White House thing, or am I reading too much into it?
There is competition. Fans only have so much money to spend if they want to watch live soccer, live football. And so, I think there is that aspect to it. But I also think it's also Gianni Infantino continually trying to curry favor with the White House, 1 year out from the World Cup. I think he wants to make sure that, the administration is fully on board, that they're not going to be throwing any monkey wrenches, into the preparations. But, there is the travel ban. And we're already running into this, with Haiti. Haiti was put on the list of countries where there's a travel ban, and they're playing in the Gold Cup. Obviously, they've been eliminated. But, even one of their players made the comment, hey, it's tough not having our usual full level of support, though he did say he appreciated the people that came out. So, we're already running into this. So I think, Juventus's visit, which looked incredibly awkward in terms of the video. It was just a very almost surreal type of situation that people were witnessing. Again, I think that's Gianni Infantino trying to stay front and center with the Trump administration and do what he can to make sure that the World Cup next year goes off without a hitch.
Jeff, I know that we're still very early in Pochettino's reign. And he's had some tough results, hasn't he? And he's been sort of involved in these kind of issues with selection and things. But in general terms, what's the American sort of fan view of Pochettino's reign, being a year out from a home World Cup, do you think?
I think there's some skepticism building. There was a very vocal segment of the fan base that for a long time said, if only we had a real coach, a coach with international pedigree, then he would be able to take this generation of players and really push them into the upper stratospheres of a World Cup, like a quarterfinal or semifinal. And so I think the expectation was that things would change immediately, but that hasn't been the case. So I think fans are starting to look at Pochettino with a little bit more skeptical eye. I think is understanding that he has not had his full complement of players to work with. The 2 starting outside backs, everyone being healthy, are going to be Anthony Robinson and Serginho Dest. They have not played, hardly at all under Pochettino, and Dest has not played at all. And those are 2 really important players for the U.S. It sounds almost counterintuitive because you wouldn't think that outside backs would be that vital to a team's attack, but a guy like Dest in particular, who has the ability to kind of deliver the unexpected, that's a big miss. And so I think there is some understanding that, Pochettino hasn't had everyone available. I think it will be really interesting when the international windows in September, October, November come up to see who's available, who he picks, and if there are any kind of surprising omissions. I think, like I said, expectations were high. Pochettino has not really met them. But you talk to some former pros, not necessarily Landon Donovan or Tim Howard, they think that there's still time. And really, it's all about getting players at their peak in top form when the World Cup starts next year. I do think it hurts a little bit not having these guys available for this tournament, because the Gold Cup was viewed as not so much a high level of competition, but it was a chance to get everyone together, get everyone on the same page, and raise the level of understanding of what Pochettino wants tactically, culturally, all of those things. So, and I think ultimately that will hurt the U.S. effort next year, but it just remains to be seen how much.
Jeff, it's a hard one to ask this because obviously the US team right now is, like you say, it could be a C team, even a D team. But if you had to predict right now, which of the three hosts do you think is best prepared to go, not to go the distance, but to go further in the competition? Is it Canada? Is it the US? Is it Mexico? And obviously Canada, we know, are coached by an American in Jesse Marsh. So does that add an element to it as well?
I mean, we'll see how this Gold Cup shakes out, but I think Canada has a ton of momentum behind it. Granted, Alphonso Davies is injured and he's going to be missing for a huge chunk of the run up to the World Cup, but it just seems like Canada is playing with a ton of confidence. They've got guys like Jonathan David, who is trying to figure out what his next big contract move is, and yet he is taking a risk by playing in this tournament. I mean, he could conceivably get injured, but he's willing to put on the Canada shirt and try to move this program forward. And so, I think the experience at the last World Cup was helpful, just kind of giving Canada players, that big tournament experience. And so I really look at them as having, again, a ton of momentum, a lot of confidence, and they've got a manager in Jesse Marsh who is not afraid to stir the pot. So, I just see a confident group. Now, that confidence is one bad result away from being diminished significantly. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in the later parts of the Gold Cup. But I do think Canada is really the furthest along out of all the three co-hosts.
But, one thing Pochettino did say not that long ago was he talked about why not dream and why not try and set the target as winning the World Cup. That whenever England managers are asked that, they've sort of shied away from it up until maybe probably the last couple of tournaments, because England obviously have progressed quite well recently. But I mean, how did that go down? How was that sort of received that Pochettino would talk in those terms?
I think that's received in a way that, that's what he has to say. I mean, it's his job in part to try to build up the program, try to build up attention, expectations ahead of the World Cup. And, I think he's got a little bit less to lose than maybe an American manager might. Pochettino, whether the U.S. does well or doesn't, I don't think his reputation is going to be severely damaged if the U.S. doesn't do well. So, again, I think he's trying to build up attention, build up belief amongst the fans. I mean, there is a segment of the fans that I think still needs to be brought back on side. But yeah, I don't think anyone took that comment terribly seriously. I mean, it's a situation where there's a lot of hope that the U.S. will go deep into the tournament, but there's also a lot of skepticism as well as, do they have the players to do it? And really, next year's test is going to say a lot about this generation of players. They've been built up a lot. They've been called a golden generation a lot. The biggest reason being because of what they've done with their clubs and the clubs that they're playing for. But, of late, they haven't really delivered on the international stage, and people have blamed the coach before. Now, more and more, I think the onus is on the players to really deliver next summer.
Just on that, Jeff, I mean, you've covered the US for a long time and you know the game in the US. What is the expectation from the public and from the US media of this team? What is the bare minimum? Quarterfinals, round 16? What would be the kind of the successful World Cup for the US?
I think a quarterfinal finish would be looked at as a success. But that's going to require winning 2 knockout stage games. They've only ever won 1. And that was in 2002 when they got matched up with Mexico, and hey, that was a rivalry came, and there were some unique circumstances, I think, surrounding that particular clash. But again, the expectations for this generation of players are high, and so I think people are looking at a quarterfinal finish as doable. But man, a lot of things are going to have to go right. The biggest one being just health. Balogun has been injured. I went through the list before. Dest, Anthony Robinson. you know, and then they've got some other issues to sort out as well. I mean, the goalkeeper situation is still very much up in the air. I mean, we'll see if Matt Turner's move to Lyon goes through. You know, they still don't know who the striker is going to be. I don't know that that's been sorted out that much by this particular tournament going on right now. I mean, Patrick Aubameyang is the starter, but I don't know that anyone really looks at him as a serious threat to get a lot of playing time at the World Cup next year. So, but again, I think, you know, trying to balance high hopes with realism, I think the expectation is a quarterfinal finish. But again, that's going to be very difficult given the team's history and where it is right now in terms of its form.
Well, maybe the fact that there's kind of low expectations right now might actually help when it comes to tournaments. So, you know, under promise and over deliver maybe. But listen, thanks for your time, Jeff. I'm sure that the World Cup's going to be an amazing spectacle. Maybe not for the US, but for everybody else. But we'll soon find out in 12 months' time. Well, that's all for this week. We'll be back again soon with the Football Reporters.